you're not change ready or change prepared.
Yeah.
Well, there could be a reason for it because it's a really dumb idea.
Welcome to Undocked.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to have the chat. I thought it'd be helpful, Torsten, perhaps as a starting point. Anyone who doesn't know you, doesn't know Seaspan, could you perhaps just give us a bit of a background to, let's start with who you are and then who Seaspan is.
Yeah, I'm Danish by birth, recently dual passport holder of Denmark and Canada. But have been in or around the maritime industry for most of my career. Started in Maersk, started in finance, studied economics and finance at university, and then ended up in shipping somehow as most people who aren't started on a ship, they end up in shipping through odd ways. And I did it the standard Danish way. Maersk was the biggest company at the time, and
you're part of the Maersk mafia.
Yes, I was.
There's so many Danes around the world who started at Maersk and then
and really influenced the cultures of the companies that they go into invariably. True. As well. I've always found that with
yeah, but I think some of it will eventually change. It's a generational thing. If you go back to when I was young, the world had no computers and no cars and all that. Now, at that time, Maersk was one of the few companies, actually, not just in Denmark, but globally, that really had a big organization abroad, not just with local employees, where they put people abroad, and you got chances very early on. I was not. I think my first CFO position, I was in my mid-late 20s.
Wow! Because I was trying to work that out. I was looking at your CV, and it's sort of C-level positions in the 90s, and I was thinking, how is that? Was that unusual at the time, or did they really back you?
No, but you at that time, Maersk's structure, and a lot of it was you got opportunities abroad at a very early age, and management opportunities. So as people developed, you got people coming back and sitting in various countries that had a lot of international leadership experience. And if you go back to the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there weren't that many of them generally around, and certainly not in shipping. Now everybody's there. But at the time, you placed in a country, typically either there was a country manager and a country CFO that were typically expatriates. That was also a governance issue, that you didn't want them to. Some of the bigger countries had bigger populations, but then you were basically ran the business there. That was it.
Wow. Where did you go?
Initially, Pakistan.
Wow.
And I said no a few times, and then they convinced me and never regretted it.
Yeah.
Because you really, when you're sitting there, you really get a chance to do what you run the business the way you want. Because you can always say, well, if you're not satisfied, then come down and visit. And nobody did.
So you weren't a seafarer yourself, but you must have had that kind of seafaring sort of adventurous spirit to kind of be persuaded to go and do that. Because again, like you said, at the time, it wasn't that it wasn't like it is today with a much more global world. Do you think that you maybe had that kind of adventurous spirit that many seafarers have?
Yeah, clearly I come from, but maybe it's sort of, I don't want to sort of build a halo around it. It's I come from a village of 800, maybe 800. I think 800 heads, and I don't know how many of them will actually be cows and how many will be people, but sort of 800 people, and you then at some stage either you settle in there, and a lot of my schoolmates from back then has done. They live within a mile or two of where they were born, or you go out, and then once you sort of moved away from that, and then you're in Denmark, you'd go to Copenhagen, whatever. The step to going further abroad is not that difficult.
Yeah.
So that's it. But yeah, I had great fortune of getting early experience in leading teams in places where there weren't anybody to really help you solve the problems but yourself.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sedna. In trade, every decision matters and delays cost money. But when communication, context and action are spread across different systems, mistakes are inevitable. Important details get lost in email, execution happens somewhere else, and teams waste time switching screens instead of moving a deal forward. Sedna solves this by bringing everything together. Email, AI, integrations, and voyage management are united in one operating system, designed to keep context and action side by side. The result is fewer errors, faster collaboration, and decisions made with confidence. Sedna is trusted by operators, brokers, and port agents worldwide to deliver clarity at speed. Learn more at sedna.com.
What was the biggest lesson you learned as CFO in Pakistan in your 20s?
Listen to people. Actually, a lot of people will know a lot of what you need. You just need to sort of get them to volunteer it or get them to speak. When I came in, I decided not to have an office because at the end of the day, I was sitting there. I did say, no, I don't want to clean it out and use it for something else. HR, anything confidential. Then I can sit in the middle of the group, listen to people, and then that. I think maybe less about the role, but in general about life. Then one is that people are very much the same. They have the same hopes and aspirations, right? Media today and social media certainly will drive us towards sharper edges and put us back in the trenches on each side, and then we can yell at each other, and then we can sit with our morning coffee and write harsh words on X or Twitter or whatever, and then we feel that we've done something for the world today. People want the same. They want to have a good life. They want to see their children grow up and all that. And then maybe on a more, you sometimes, and this may be a bit cynical, but you grow up, and certainly when you grow up in Denmark, as I have, it's a sort of thing, yeah, but you want to go out and save the world and whatever, and you realize the world is a very big place to save. And you can easily get lost. You can easily get lost in trying to do it all rather than focus efforts and say, well, let's just help this part. And then we can move on to the next. And I think from a business perspective, that's also, since then, I've become very aware of not trying to solve for the world. You do one bit that seems to be the most important. And then when I was in Pakistan, it might be to help the two small children that were begging down on the corner every morning. And then you can build it from there. Often, especially when you sit in a head office in a big organization, it becomes, it's sort of, oh yeah, but now we will just sit here and concoct the model for the world, or the mother of all models that will solve everything. And it never really does, right? It just ends up in more and more details, and you don't you never get to a solution.
I mean, you talk there, sort of coming from Denmark, which is a very outward-looking country in my experience, but it's not a hugely diverse country. And then you're working in.
It's difficult to be diverse when you're that few people.
Sure. But then you've got like the shipping industry, which is very global or very diverse. But then when I was looking through your CV, you've also worked in a big range of some of the biggest players in the industry. You know, you've got V Group, you've worked in Inchcape, you've worked in Maersk, we talked about. How do you sort of look at that in terms of that kind of the diversity of those environments, companies, different global setups? Do you see a big difference, or are all of them been sort of fundamentally the kind of same business, if you know?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Actually, not one that I had thought a lot about, because typically I'm very adverse to this. When you're sitting and when you're taking a new role, the first question, so what are you going to change? And if you know that already, if you know the solution already, you are not the right person for that job, because you will miss things. It is the standard. If you have a hammer, then all problems are a nail, right? So from that perspective, I think there's been diversity amongst the companies, or differences amongst the companies. I think you come from a Maersk Group, which is a very strong corporate values built by the founders and their families onwards. And when I was there, also very strong focus on organizational building, probably to the level at the stage where sometimes it took over and we lost a little focus on business interests rather than building people. It's great for people. It was great for people. It was fantastic. But sometimes sometimes we can have a discussion about your career plan, but shouldn't we just make sure that there's a company that grows, so there's a career to be had? And often you get this, and certainly we've also seen it now. I'll start sounding old and grumpy, but you also see it today, and sort of, I've now been here for 6 months. So when am I gonna? What are the plans the company has for me for my next career step? And it's sort of
the intern's worried that they're not making enough impact.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I think on the positive side, I think it's fantastic. And after having a discussion like that, you'll have to be a little bit happy that people are actually, that there are not those hierarchical structures to the same extent, and people are willing to come and ask. And then you can have a discussion with them. But often it's a discussion that 6 months is maybe not enough to be C-level. When you're fresh out of university, you're fresh in from having had a vessel career. So it'll take a little longer, and there's a few things on performance you have to do first. But I think values and having a set of corporate values is not, if you do it the right thing, and we've introduced it in Seaspan as well. We'll get back to Seaspan a bit later, but we've introduced it, and we introduced it as we grew because we wanted to make sure that actually, as simple as that, we hired the right people. We hired people. It's not a gimmick as such. We hire people who fit into those values, because if you don't fit into that value, then none of us are going to be happy. And again, then you go back to the cynical business perspective. Then you're wasting the person's time, but you're also wasting the company's resources in hiring and have to rehire. And that was when we said, now is actually the time where we need to do this. We can't just rely on, but Seaspan is a big growing company. We will want to be there. If you don't adapt and don't feel the same, carry the same values as we have, you'll probably be hard for both parties.
Yeah.
So from that angle, I'm very focused. That's a strong. If you don't align with the values, then don't. And the next is then the performance part. End of the day, you need to have a company to have values for, and you can do a lot of things, and you can try to. I know you've talked about decarbonization. Also, end of the day, then you can try to solve the world, but you have to have a company that can move forward rather than sit in trenches and saying, well, we shouldn't do anything if we can't have ammonia and methanol vessels, then on green methanol vessels, then we shouldn't do anything. Okay, but that doesn't get us anywhere.
I think I'm glad you've sort of gone in that direction, because that was kind of where I was certainly very keen to take the discussion, because you talked about sort of a purpose-driven organization at the start, and you talked about sort of wanting to change the world, and then bringing it up to date with Seaspan. Because when I look at Seaspan, it comes across this really, really strong commitment to sort of ethical business. And there was a lot of focus, for example, on your social media feed about the ESG report that you've done and the values side of it. But what really pricked my attention when you said there was that it sounded to me like you remember clearly that part of the journey where you thought we have to start to codify those values and what we want to see and those behaviors. So I'd love to kind of get your perspective on that and talk about a little bit more about that moment when you saw that as a company.
Before you do, though, Torsten, please give us an intro to Seaspan, or the editor will have a fit.
Yeah, the largest independent provider of container ships in the world. And we are now by quite a margin the largest, and we're on track with the new building program we have running. We will be on track to have more than 2.5 million TEU under ownership and management. And that's our model. We have to add value by owning and operating ships. So in principle, we need to be better than our customers at building and operating ships, because otherwise they would do it themselves. But that's where we've, over the past 5-6 years, shown that our market has told us that we are doing a good job here.
I was just going to say that all of your customers own and operate ships as well. I mean,
yes.
Looking at what I know of your customers, so there is a kind of question of why would they even bother working with Seaspan, if that makes sense. So what's the kind of differentiator?
There will always be some form of there will be some issues on the balance sheet or capital requirements. Right.
Okay.
Today, a new build. So that's the very base of it. That a new build series of, let's say, 15,000 TEU vessels, they will, if you buy 10 of them, then you are well over $1 billion. So you can't you don't want to go around and put all your money there. That's the one. Two is then benchmarking and learning. And three is then hopefully that they see that we are doing a good job in our model, what we'll call our integrated operating model, where we we're not a big onshore organization given the size of the fleet we have. And that means, and we are purposely doing a lot to keep it as simple as possible. We're constantly trying to the transformation point, trying to simplify things, to be able to be as lean as possible, because that allows us to have, not to have too many silos, but have everybody engaged. When there is a customer problem or customer opportunity, commercial opportunity, we will have a solution that has already thought of all the dimensions, whether it's legal, organizational, financial, etc. And that's what our customers like. So the fact that we can, the full lifetime of the vessel, build, operate, manage, and obviously charter out vessels, that's with our customers, that's what they like. And we're increasingly collaborating with them. We're sort of moving to become strategic partners. We'll often have discussions with our customers. And well, end of the day, then they end up doing it themselves or whatever, but that's fine.
Yeah.
As long as we're at the table and they can see that we are actually adding to the discussion, then they will want to do business with us. So that's always the same, right? It's one of the things when I came in, I had to change is benchmarking against your competitors is good, but you have to realize that your customers is actually, those are the ones you have to, if you can't do things better than your customers, then it doesn't matter how good your competitors are, because you're not going to win anyway.
Yeah.
So there are bits and pieces. We have some, again, if you look at our customer portfolio, it's all the big players and very healthy, significant players in the container shipping industry. And now also, as a side note, also now the PCTC, the car carrier industry.
Yeah, I saw that.
So they are all very well versed in owning and operating ships, but there are pockets where we can add value in some form or fashion to their business, and that's why they've chosen.
To bring it back around to that ESG point, I guess potentially that's one of those areas, is that you can invest in alternative fuels in a way that others may struggle.
You haven't seen us, and I've been vocal, and our CEO, Bing Chen, has also been mentioning this a few times. You're not going to see us much sit. We've been pushed, certainly when we were listed on the New York Stock Exchange, to come up with our 2050 and 2045 targets for what we want to do decarbonization. And we've been a bit reluctant to do that. I don't see the only thing I know is that in 2050, I can make all sorts of statements. I'm not going to be here. It's not and I have a healthy skepticism for people for executives who will stand up, executives in their 50s and 60s will stand up and say, yeah, this is how we're going to look in 30 years from now. That's sort of, it can be a free shot, right? And what we're doing is saying, okay, we will look 2, 3, 5 years forward, 5 years sort of a cycle we have financially and everything else, and saying, are we better? Are we doing better than what we did in terms of ESG and sustainability and decarbonization? Yeah. Are we moving in the right direction? And then there can be points, sort of big leaps. There can be the first series of LNG vessels we do, the first retrofits to methanol we do, the first other types of new buildings we do, or it can be just vessel, you could say vessels technology and making them more efficient. There can be some leaps, but otherwise it's a matter of sort of moving towards a North Star, not just following it, not just saying, well, we will be like this in 2050. We will always follow any regulation there is, and we will always try to become better. But what we are trying to do is we want to run a long-term sustainable business, a business that's here many, many years forward. Part of that is having sustainability as part of the way you work. It's not a goal in such. It's a specific goal. It's sort of been embedded in everything that our leaders do and our managers do day to day. And that's how we've tried to do it. Otherwise, it very easily becomes slogans on a board, and we don't believe that.
Yeah, so it's almost like a principle of how you work rather than sort of artificial goals.
As I said, I heard someone say that at an interview series or a panel debate once that they want to have a sustainable company, and sustainability is part of being a sustainable company today. If you want to be here in 30, 40 years, you need and have grown and been successful, you will need to have a view on how you how sustainability will impact your business. And that's what we have. Ultimately, but again, back to what I said earlier, ultimately you can make an impact if you're big enough to make an impact. And if you paint yourself in a corner and sit and yell at others, there's a big likelihood that you won't be big enough to have an impact. And then all your good thoughts will remain exactly that, good thoughts. Move forward. We're better last week than we were. Are we better next week than we were last week? And then that's a measure. So our role is we will have to be able to deliver anything our customers want, as long as it's safe and legal and all that stuff, of course. But in any types of vessel and propulsion they would want, we should be at a level where we can be discussing what's the latest technology, and yes, we can build it, and yes, we can operate. Whether our customers are then deciding, no, we want conventional vessels for now, but conventional fuel vessels for now, but with a retrofit to something in 4, 5, 6 years, or whether they say we want LNG or methanol or whatever now, that's part of their strategy. We're discussing that with them, but ultimately we need to help make their business better.
I'm really interested on that ESG point, because I think, like, as I said, clearly you can see there's a really strong ESG commitment. I guess if I try and boil down what's in my mind, it's a question between how much of that ESG and sustainability is a cost of doing business and how much of it gives you a commercial advantage. I don't know if does that make sense as a question, because
because you can, and it's linking also to, maybe I say it mirrors also the same discussions you would have with transformation and digital transformation, whether you talk AI or blockchain or whatever. There's always a distinct risk that you are letting your passion and your good ideas run amok or run wild or run too far, and then that you're just wasting money. We are very disciplined all the way through. Obviously, from the vessels we built, have to with their base. Obviously, then and when you're talking billions of dollars, there will be very thorough investment cases for it. But we are doing business cases for everything. We're doing business cases for rollout or implementation of new systems, even if they are off the shelf. We are doing business cases for each new hire. Why is it this person needed? Because, again, the long-term view, once people are with us, we want them to be with us and have a career for a long time. We don't want it to be transaction. And so we are trying, and we believe that's the way to go about it, saying, we can invest if we can see there is an idea in it. Sometimes you will have to invest ahead of the curve in terms of knowledge and people. You don't need to invest ahead of the curve for building a ship. Or we do. You can. We don't. We are very disciplined also on that. We don't build a ship without having a commercial contract already. We sign them at the same time. So we don't, as you would say, go naked in terms of having ships that we are then having to peddle. You can make a lot of money if you do that correctly. It's just not our business model. Again, long-term sustainability, as stable as we can make our growth, and the more stable we can make our growth, the happier we are, as long as it grows. But on that, so for other things, you can easily get ahead of yourself or get ahead of your skis, as you would say in Canada, and start investing in something where there's not really a clear path to. There's not a clear path to where you'd go. Sometimes you take a calculated risk because you don't know the future. We tend to do that a lot more on the people side in making sure that we have spent the money in learning about what is there, and then it becomes also easier to see is there good potential business coming up, or does the investment place a foundation for something else?
Based on that, because you've been in the COO seat, I think, for 5 years. I think you came in 2020, which is obviously a strange time to come in.
19, so 6 years now.
6, okay. And you said that you run in roughly a kind of 5-year cycle. What are some of the things that you found when you first came in that you wanted to change, and how has that process been? And what are some of the things that you are now looking at and thinking we need to be we need to be making changes here?
I think now I said I didn't have any preconceived notions when I came into the role. The role sounded fantastic. It was a bit of a turnaround. Seaspan had grown a lot, but the financial performance hadn't necessarily followed. And there were cracks here and there in how it worked. So when I said I had no preconceived notion, it was made very clear when I joined what the mandate was. And I was the last one of the executive team. Most of the executive team, bar one, had been changed during 2018. And so we were a new team and we had been mandated by the board to change things. And very specific things on operational performance, on cost, on making sure that we were growing profitably. Again, going back to that was when we sat down and said, well, this has to be a long-term sustainable company. Growth has to make money, otherwise we're wasting our shareholders' money. And at that time we were listed, so there were a lot of shareholders that were very keen on. And so when I came in, it was a matter of saying, okay, the task has been laid down. We know what you need to do. Then the first thing is, do you have the people around you that can help with that and can facilitate that?
Right.
And do you have an organizational structure that can facilitate that? So sort of small examples. We ran our fleet personnel, our crewing, out of Vancouver, except we didn't run it out of Vancouver. We ran it out of India. So we just had a group of people sitting in Vancouver. And that was sort of all the growth in the team was in Vancouver. And it was sort of, it doesn't really seem, if you want to, I'm a big believer in that you're putting the decision making as far as possible to the people who actually sit with the problem on the front line. There are limits and there are governance and controls and all this, obviously. So that was one. We moved the head office for crewing to Mumbai, where all the people sat, and empowered them to do more. There were around safety issues. We had a very high LTI frequency, lost time incident frequency at the time. And it was a matter of how we built up. It became almost a legal approach where every time there was an incident, the safety manual was added. There was sort of 50 pages added to the safety manual.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you just follow the safety manual, you should have known if you just follow the 2,000 pages of safety manual, you can, of course, you're not doing anything wrong. You won't have an incident. The problem is nobody's going to read 2,000 pages, right? And it becomes the example I used at the time is you also have this annoying bing, 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 bing if you don't put your seatbelt on in the car. But it was annoying the first times when you didn't think about it, but now you put your seatbelt on without thinking about it, right? And that's when you have a safety culture. In that way, it's saying you don't need a safety manual if you think safety, right? If you think about what can go wrong. And that was the culture we needed to build. So we also adjusted in that part of the organization. So focus, everybody had talked about at that time, we wanted to talk about operational excellence, which is one of the core pillars of what we do or who we are. But it was undefined. So we said, okay, what is it? Well, it's safety. If people get injured or we damage vessels or property, then we are not really a long-term sustainable business. So that has to be. Then it's reliability. We charter vessels out to our customers on long-term contracts. They expect these vessels to be available 24/7, 365. So let's make sure they are available 24/7, 365, don't have breakdowns, don't get stuck in ports, etc. And then, it's economics, making sure that we actually have money to invest invest in the next. And ultimately, you also in container shipping and in a number of other businesses, being cost efficient is a license to operate. If you're not cost efficient, you can be very good, but you're not going to be very big. Scale is also a key driver for success in container shipping. You can do a lot with scale that you can't do without it. You realize when you have it, that there are so many more opportunities.
Like what?
You can do, it's not, the obvious one is, of course, driving economies of scale through at a completely different level.
Right.
There are many more items there are many more parts that gives rise to economies of scale when you have the size. Things that would saying, well, this is not really worth it. Well, it might not be worth it your time if you have 20 ships. But when you have 250, that little saving actually, that little saving is a lot. So to scale, procurement obviously being better deals, but not just in terms of pricing, but also you can make completely different types of deals with and also with your customers. We have a strong balance sheet. We're financially very, very well-established company. That means that we can do things for our customers or with our customers that others can't necessarily do. So scale helps on a lot of things, and in some businesses it doesn't necessarily. There's some segments of shipping that don't necessarily have the same opportunities for scale advantages, but container shipping.
One of the things that I'm sort of keen to come back to that you were talking about there was you were talking about taking that very considered approach and that looking sort of business first when looking to make investments and to, coming back to the transformation theme, because presumably that scale is really important when it comes to things like R&D and approaching some of the transformations that we're going through. So, for example, the uncertainty still really that's with digitalisation and with decarbonisation, there's sort of both, there's a lot happening on technology moving very, very fast. It becomes difficult to take that sort of steady approach that you're perhaps more instinctive towards. So I'm just really interested to know how you're approaching things where the future isn't certain. So, for example, decarbonisation, how are you kind of making your plays with the ships that you're building and how you're approaching that?
If we take it for the ships, ultimately we discuss with our customers, and as I said, we need to be able to deliver something that makes their business better. It's their choice. They're the customer. As long as we can build and operate it safely and reliably, then hopefully they will pick us. On the other part, on scale and things moving fast. But as I said, we are very focused on constantly simplifying things, staying lean. We would prefer not to have what you've sometimes seen in shipping, that these big rounds of thousands of people being fired because, that strategy didn't really work and we ramped up for something and now we have to ramp down. We are not even 1,000 people, so it would be fairly dramatic if we fired 1,000 people on shore. But we are not 1,000 people for a reason, and that is that we want to stay simple. And we also want to make sure that we are not just, as soon as there's something, which is, I guess, something that people will tend to do. Okay, we are interested. Let's take an example. Let's AI or decarbonization, whatever. We're interested in this. Let's hire some people who can work on this with us. We don't do that to the same extent. What we do is saying, there's always, and I've seen it in the past, let's say there's this little startup you guys have, Nick, certainly you've worked with startups, right? There's this little startup and they do fantastic things. Let's just embed them in our organization. And then 2 years later, you can't understand why this startup suddenly have stopped being innovative. Because they've been rolled into the groupthink that you are having, right? And the discussions about at the water cooler is no longer about the latest coding. It's about the report you have to send to someone. So the way we are doing this and the way we're investing in this is, as I said, it is considered, but where we're investing a lot is in working across industry, outside industry, with everybody. We collaborate to a very extreme extent. We collaborate with anybody where there's relevance. And we have a lot of collaborations going where we are then, whoever is on the forefront or doing something interesting, we will collaborate with them. And then we are keeping up to date. They're getting opportunities to do business at a completely different scale. And we do that for decarbonization. Who is it which design houses or which engine manufacturers are, or which small research house is at the forefront of things? Then we're reaching out and they reach out to us and then say, yes, let's have a look at it. And at that way, we keep the organizational understanding fresh and sort of towards the forefront of what's going on. You can never be completely at the forefront when you end of the day run a fairly large business, but you can be very, very close.
And I guess it also means that you're able to stick to your core, the things your customers really care about, that you as an organization have that real expertise in, and you don't get distracted by some of these other things you could do.
It's part of, and there are lots of things we can do. That's where the discipline comes in, because once you collaborate across, and it's in all functions across everything, internally and externally, as I said, once you do that, you'll get a lot of ideas that sounds very interesting. But that's where then the discipline comes in and saying, okay, let's take and sit and have a look at it. An example could be we were not doing a lot to shore technology 2-3 years ago. There were a lot of ideas, but no business cases could support it. Then came the low orbit satellite, OneWeb, Starlink, etc. And suddenly a lot of these ideas and business cases could be pulled out and dusted off. Then some of them started making sense. At that time, if we had run around and tried to do all of it, we would have wasted a lot of money.
What's the lens that you look through to make that decision? Because I can see, on the one hand, simplify. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, although maybe easier said than done. Collaborate creates lots of ideas, and I can see that you get the kind of collaborative chaos, and then you've also trying to get the discipline of stuff that makes sense. So how do you pick, if you've got 50 ideas, how do you pick the 3 that make sense? Like, what does make sense look like?
Business case.
Because it all comes back to the ROI.
Yeah, but sometimes you can't make it. We are not that dogmatic that it says it has to be a number. Sometimes sometimes there are regulatory things that just needs to be done. Right? Otherwise, when we're looking at safety or when we're looking at data infrastructure as 2 completely different examples, or let's take cybersecurity, and because that's very much up in the discussions at the moment, cybersecurity and safety. What you're actually making a business case on is the absence of something. There will be a bigger absence of incidents, right? And it becomes you're trying to prove a negative. It just becomes, and I have been sitting with it, sort of saying, so. So we introduced some technology that should help with container fires, and it was fairly expensive. That's fine. So the question from the board at the time was, well, do you have a lot of container fires? Well, we've had one. Did you put it out? Yes. So what is it again you want to? It's reducing risk that in principle things shouldn't happen. And what is the risk that happens? Well, once every 5 years or whatever, we have this issue. And so some of this stuff becomes different. We're not dogmatic in that. There we'll have to say, well, we do believe, again, based on that we've collaborated, based on the knowledge we've gained, that this will have a significant impact on risk mitigation or risk reduction. And that's how we would do it. What are the 5 pieces out of the 50 that we will run with? Some cases it's as simple as, well, 10 of these things are dependent on 2 other projects. So let's do the 2 other projects first, because otherwise we will never get to the 10. And that's going back to, don't solve for everything at once. Focus it, and to back to simplicity it's harder said than done, but that's part you need to build that into your culture. Otherwise you're getting into this that you once in a while have to have a decluttering or simplicity exercise. And for large conglomerates, then that's when you see the thousands of people being fired, right? And the issue is, if you fire 1,000 people and they each have an average 3 family members, you're actually impacting 4,000 people. And I think sometimes executives tend to forget that it's not when they are firing, can be a necessary thing to do for the survival or the benefit of everybody else in the company. It's more when you build it up. You have to think about, is this a long-term sustainable, or is this just because I want something done now? When we have that, saying we want something done now, we will, but it may only be a 1 or 2 year project, transformation project, or other. We will hire people in for 2 years to do it, or help, either backfill or help, and saying, well, when this is over, first of all, we'll hire people who are doing it full time and have done this and are experts in it, and then they will be matched up with some of our own team, and then we say, well, when the project is over, these people disappear again.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we would hire in, and that's what many people or many companies will do. Then they'll hire in and then say, now it's done. So either the people will hang around and do maybe less value-adding tasks, because, hey, it's always nice to have someone who can clean up my PowerPoint presentation. But I'm asking an engineer with 40 years experience to do it. It may be overkill, but it's nice to have it, right? That's one, or they will start doing things that are just not value-adding.
You talked about people there, and that's kind of been a bit of a recurrent theme. When it comes to the sorts of transformations that you talked about making early on when you joined Seaspan, but also some of these these projects, collaborations, these are all about taking the organization forward. And you said you're a lean operation, but it's still a big organization. What do you think is the secret for taking people with you on any kind of transformation in your organization?
End of the day, it's as simple as it's easy to say change management, but change management is, when you hear it, I do believe we've learned that we have to be better at it. But change management, everybody understands. But when it comes from sort of an executive group and say, "Oh, we must do change management," you have to be clear on that. That often that becomes a top down. Oh, you're not. What is it? The term? You're not change ready or change prepared.
Yeah.
Well, there could be a reason for it, because it's a really dumb idea.
Yeah.
No, I'm not prepared to take the company down the drain. It's sort of. But it becomes very sort of, you're there. We need to do some change management because they clearly didn't see the brilliance of my vision. And then you need to get the buy-in is on the other side. Buy-in is also an easy cop out, because sometimes you need to do. There are things where people will just not want to change because they like where they are, they like where the company is. But you need to paint the. You need to paint the end of the tunnel picture. Why are we going through pain to get to somewhere else? That's going back to business case. Business cases for us is not just financials. That's actually a small part of it. It's what are we actually going to get? If we invest this, ask people to do all this work, what are we going to get in the other end? And then as an outcome of what we're going to get, okay, but how does that impact financials? How does it impact safety? How does it impact our way of operating? That becomes second, that the ultimate measure. But what we are looking at is how will the world look for the people involved once we're done? And if you can sort of visualize or verbalize that, then you get people engaged. And then the more, obviously, it's not secret, the more people you get involved in and people feel they have their input, the easier it is. You will always end up in, the more people you ask, that you'll just have different opinions. And that's where the top down will have to come. You can't it's not at the end of the day, however much I want involvement, it's not a democratic process. Someone has been tasked to make the decision and someone will not be happy. I'm fine with people not being happy. I'm own management team. We don't agree on everything either. I will also never expect them to go into a meeting saying, I don't agree with this, and they've told their teams, I think we should go for solution B. Torsten wants solution A, but we'll try to see. If it's then solution A that comes out, I don't expect them to flip and then say, oh yeah, by the way, solution A was anyway best. They can still say that solution B, in their view, was best. But I do expect them to support the solution that's made and explain to their teams why that decision was made.
Mm-hmm.
We've had in the past people who sort of grudgingly said, okay, this is the way we go, but then went out and kept their own narrative to their teams and didn't explain why we're doing it. And we only realized it as the project went on, that there was sort of resistance in parts of the organization because they hadn't been told by their manager why we were doing it. Those are back to values and culture. That's not a culture we can have.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the commitment to a really strong values culture is its ability to actually inform decision making throughout the organization. So, I mean, I started trying to get you to go there. Nick pulled me back.
I think we left one there where you said, when is the trigger point for when you need it?
Well, I think more before we jump to the trigger point, maybe kind of like how important is the culture and how do you actually kind of manage that and how do you kind of bring people into that culture? You mentioned, I think, a little bit that it's even part of your decision-making process in terms of recruitment and stuff. So talk to us about the culture that you have there and the values at Seaspan.
Well, the culture is, can you run a company where people have complete... We're not talking culture as in whether you're from one part of the world. We're talking company culture now, because having different cultures as such and different backgrounds, it makes an organization stronger. As long as you can funnel it into a common purpose or this is how we run, this is what we do. Then on the culture is important because, again, from a business point of view, and I do apologize if I sometimes runs it into being cynical and saying, how do we get something out of that? But that's my job. From a business point of view, you're just losing too much resources if you constantly have to sit and have personality clashes or cultural clashes. You can change a culture, and we've had to change parts of the culture, but there's also something deep-rooted in the Seaspan DNA that we wanted to maintain and keep. But it's not a uniformity of opinions and ideas. It's a uniformity about how we go about things and how we show up for work. What we do. We are very big on safety is deeply ingrained in what we do, and thinking about how we do things, as again, back to the discipline. And we think about things before we do them. Ownership. You see a problem, make sure that it's solved or someone is taking care of solving it. And that's easy to say, but you will see in many organizations, both big and small, certainly big, that no, but it's the other department's issue, right? And everybody wants to solve it, but it's so big on ours that it's actually part of our values. If you don't take ownership, if you're being seen in our organization as someone who will leave a problem or will let someone else try to, you will stick out. I mean, not in a good way. And collaboration, as I said, is part of our values, is part of our DNA. It becomes, again, in cynical business, culture becomes not a tool, but a foundation for being able to do things efficiently and effectively.
Right.
Because otherwise you're doing things because you want to make the company better, you want to make better products or solutions for your customers, you want to make life better for your employees, all that stuff. But if you end up having to have so many differences of how people are doing things, and then you're ending up focusing on the wrong thing.
Uh-huh.
You're trying to solve internal issues rather than the external issues that you should be solving.
Yeah. And if we could then just sort of, because you mentioned there was a tipping point when you started to actively think about managing that. And I find that very fascinating, because when I've worked with big companies, small companies, with that sort of family feel that you get with some of the smaller, 10-ship operators, you don't need to do that so much because they know everybody personally. They can get kind of involved. Where did you see that kind of tipping point in terms of Seaspan when you started to actively manage your culture?
I'd go one step back and saying, because I think actually now I was a number of years in Maersk, and Maersk, as I used it before, as a strong values-driven company. The global values or the company values were rolled out when first Mr. Muller decided to take a less active role, but also when we realized that there were many executives that no longer had, because Maersk had become so big, there were many executives that no longer had been working at the head office. They had their careers built outside, because at the head office, you knew what would Mr. Muller do in this? That was sort of the culture. But if you had built your career in Singapore or whatever, you were not faced with this on an every day. So that was when you say, okay, we need to make sure that everybody, no matter whether you're in Singapore, in Gambia, in Honduras, or wherever, we need to make sure that everybody shows up the same way. In Seaspan, we had some years where we had a fairly high turnover of staff in certain functions. And one thing was we were going through a lot of turmoil in trying to get the business running as we were growing a lot as well, and trying to sort everything else out. That was one. But also we were just not right on the recruitment. And that was when we said, well, now we have everybody inside knew sort of and could put some words on what is it to be in Seaspan. And that was around ownership. That was around collaboration, around safety and all this, and was around just grinding until a problem was solved. If it's not an easy solution, well, then it's not an easy solution. Stop crying about it. Let's just get it solved, because that's why we're here. If we can do that and nobody else can, that's our reason for existence. But so everybody in the company could see it. But as we grow and said, well, there are people coming from outside who hasn't been on a ship for 10 years before and hasn't been in the company since inception. As we got more and more of that coming through, we said that we are not being effective enough on this. And when we look 2-3 years forward, we will have a lot of people who will mainly have been here for 3, 4, 5 years. Let's now define what they're going into and what we expect from them, because then we can set expectations. So I think the trigger for us was the period of a lot of turnover and clarity of, as we had built the strong foundation for the company and now had started to grow, we will be a very different company in 3-4 years from now. Let's make sure that the people we have in the organization and the way we deal with customers is clear to everybody. Because then it becomes so much easier that they don't have to learn over the first year what it takes to be a Seaspanner. If you can subscribe to these ideas and this way of working and this way of showing up in the office, then that's it. We didn't go. We had around bigger purposes and all that stuff. Often that becomes slogans again. What matters is not what gets you through the door. What matters is how you show up the first day.
So almost part of setting people up for success, really.
Yeah. And it is, as you said, it's a lot easier when you have a smaller company because you're there. But we just had so many people coming in from outside that we said we need to define it, because otherwise everybody will also have their own little tweak on it. And so let's now make it clear, and that we've all aligned on that this is it. And we had a process where everybody got engaged and had comments to it, and we could have probably had 15 value sets, but then it becomes again not useful.
Once you've decided what those values are and that you've been through that process, how are you making sure it doesn't end up as a slogan on the wall? Because I can see that you go through the process, you literally put it on the wall, and then no one talks about it again. I think that's quite a common thing.
Yeah. You will see it on the wall some places, but that we're very cautious about that. Again, but going back to my comment on decarbonisation, about Torsten says that we will be there in 2050.
Right.
So, yeah. For most people, that will just be a slogan on the wall saying, that's great. Yeah. What does he know that we don't? And the answer is nothing. But he made a statement around it. A lot of it's just as simple as communication, using it in every day, because it's not just for the people. We have to be careful. It's not just on the people on the shore side. We 1,000 colleagues at sea. We also expect them to live these values. And so you communicate. You use examples of any HR specialist will tell you the same thing. You'll use examples where it's being done right. Yeah. You can always find examples where it's not being done. And then you'll point it out here and there, but you get a lot further with positive examples. Communicating. We've had masters who've done where they've exhibited sort of certain values, and we've had then articles on our in-house intranet and platform that we're using for communication, saying, okay, but then now this master will give his own version of it, and he exhibited exactly the right ownership or whatever it has been. So there's a lot of communication around it. It's part of our performance appraisal system. Is that effective? I'm not sure it necessarily is, but it's a good reminder. So it's better to have it than not to have it in there. But I've seen in the past that sometimes it becomes a little bit of a cop-out for managers who don't like to be the bearer of bad news. If someone has not performed in a year and you're having performance appraisal, then you'll say, this is not very good. But you lived up to all the values. It's sort of you did a poor job, but you got to office really nicely dressed, right? It's sort of. So in that sense, when it's used like that, obviously not effective, but it's good. Used correctly, it allows a discussion about it. And that's what we've done. We are having it as part of everyday conversation. That's also why you can't have 15. You need to have 3, 4, 5, because otherwise it gets lost as normal words. Right?
Just one dig into that, because it's a real pet interest of mine. It's like you mentioned there, you got the shore team and the on-ship team. And do you think that connectivity is changing the way those teams work and collaborate and making things like culture building across the board easier? Do you see that? Is it something that's evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have loads of things we can do still to make that better. We have an app now, communication app, where news are coming out. Essentially our intranet, that's the same way a communication channel. We've opened it up for direct chats, so direct messages. We have to have some rules around it, because otherwise it can't become the official line of communication. And because you can't expect someone in the other end to sit and constantly follow their chat. If there's a fire on a ship, you're not going to send. If there's a fire on a ship, you're not going to send an Instagram message, right? It's not that. Actually, nowadays you might film it and put it on Instagram, but that's
let's not go there.
Deviating behavior. But so there has to be some rules about it. But communication becomes a lot easier. Obviously, the connectivity has played a big part, and we've been through it. We got Starlink, and now OneWeb across the fleet. In the first months, of course, we saw what I guess many others have seen, that what was across the fleet, 80 to 90% of the bandwidth was used for Netflix and Facebook Live and Instagram Reels and WhatsApp video. It's one of these where vessels were complaining not enough bandwidth, and we said, well, 20 on average, you're 20-something people on board. You have, at any given stage, what was the average for the fleet? 32 personal devices linked in and running at any 24/7. There were people that's like 5 to 10 devices more than your people. And some of you are literally, we know, standing on the bridge, and you don't have your phone on you. So there were people that were downloading the full Netflix library. And it's a transition, and it comes back. Connectivity has become a lot better now. The issue is, of course, making sure that they are not on their phones all the time.
Yeah.
But we are using it increasingly for having, you could say, small. You suddenly can have work groups that involve people on the sea. And we're doing that, for instance, for exactly around an issue like, how do we best manage that people are not on their phone all the time? How do we best manage that you still have a social community on the ship? Because one of the things we've also seen, one is, and that might be a generational thing as well, but people will go when they have their rest hours, they'll go. And we've seen cases of where rest hours is not really rest hours, because you'll just watch 3 Netflix movies, and then you get 2 hours of sleep. And we've had to handle that. But this is one of the things. Well, we can make a rule from the office, but why not get the people who are actually going to enforce it, and why not get them involved in it? It's the same on some of the safety initiatives we're doing, where we're saying, well, getting back to the 2,000-page safety manual we had many years ago, we will sit and say, okay, a certain task has to be done in a certain way. And then we can't understand that, well, doing it in this way takes 2 hours. It's safe, you don't get in. And then you can't understand that the seafarers do it in a different way. They do it in a different way because their way takes 15 minutes. So we are sitting to work less efficiently than they otherwise could. Problem with the 15 minutes is it has some risks in it. But traditionally, we and everybody else has then been forcing them back to the 2-hour inefficient way of working, rather than saying, well, let's now sit and work. You want to do it. It's clearly a faster way of doing things. Why not try to make that way safer? Maybe we'll end up at 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes, but we are far cry from 2 hours. And those discussions and how you can do that, we can suddenly have almost live with seafarers, and we are going down the road. We're looking at some big projects we're running some big projects on saying how much can you actually move of non-essential tasks and support to a vessel? How much can you move? Can you just take ashore?
Yeah.
And push it all the way to the boundary. You have a crew that's supposed to keep the vessel running and navigate it safely. That's it. Everything else, someone else should imprint it. Either I should automate it, or someone can sit somewhere else and do it for you. The same, and if there's an issue on board, then that's not a new thing. I think others are doing the same. If there's an issue on board, why not have the best chief engineers look at it? The best chief engineer today can be on one ship, but we could also place him in an office environment and have HoloLenses and whatever, and he can support a much greater variety, and he can see it live. All those things are coming into play, not just for us, but it's not that groundbreaking. I think everybody will have that as part of their development.
Yeah, it's fascinating, fascinating.
Torsten, can I ask you one more question? I'm conscious of your time, and we've gone over. But if there was one piece of advice you could give to anyone listening who's trying to embark on some kind of organizational transformation, technology transformation, what would it be?
Start with the end, and what is it you're trying to achieve? And don't, again, as I said, maybe round it off with where I started. Don't try to save the world in one go, because you end up in paralysis more often than not. If you can save the world in one go, I will gladly do what I can to help you, but I haven't seen it really work. Start with the end of what's going to be better for either your customers or your employees or the company. And that's then the aim. And then you build your case around it, and then be disciplined around what you're throwing yourself at. Be curious around everything, but be disciplined.
Torsten, thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
It's a pleasure. I feel like we could have spoken for at least another 3-4 hours, but I'll stop it there.